This is a figure, a sculpture that was found in early Europe, and one of the things that they have discovered is that many of the sculptures of early Europe show various African types. In fact, 55,000 years ago, according to 3 labs, the University of Oxford, the University of Hawaii, the University of California at Berkeley have come to the conclusion that there are no people on the earth 55,000 years ago who are not black Africans.
One thing that is indubitably clear is that Africa is the cradle of the entire human race. From 4 million years ago all the way up to 200,000 years ago, the stepwise sequence leading in an evolutionary progression from early pre-human hominid ancestors all the way up to modern human beings occurred in Africa and Africa alone. Not that there weren't any migrations out of Africa, but those migrations did not have any impact on human evolutions leading up to modern human beings until after our human beings in fact left Africa. Now what do I mean by that? A man by the name of Wainscott from England has said is that all of the populations around the globe are descendants from small founder populations that left Africa probably no later than 100,000 years ago. This means that, as C.W. Stringer has said, that all 6.5 billion people on this planet are Africans under the skin. Because if we go back far enough, everyone has an African ancestor.
Superiority or inferiority.
And so for approximately how many years was the world populated exclusively and only by Africans, black Africans?
Okay,
black skinned.
You're talking about the modern, the last
African.
Okay, because you see, the African is not only the first hominid, he's also the first human. Okay, the hominid is not completely human like us, but then comes the first human with our brain case. That's also African. And this begins to change about 55,000 years ago in Europe, where you get Africoid types becoming Caucasoid types.
Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rin mathematical papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing, too, just look at that. Imagine that that pyramid is three-dimensional, because that's what it's supposed to be. Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid, a right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse, and half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they have the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry. Now, the reason why I make that point is because every historian of science tells you that trigonometry wasn't invented until Hipparchus did 1,500 years later. Now, you see, we're not just talking about rudimentary calculation. We are now moving into the realm of higher mathematics, the foundation of all mathematics. Like ancient Kemet, a good bit of the Dogon star and calendar system centers around Sirius. Sirius is the brightest star in the heavens. This is a great time at this time of year to see it, because it's really most brilliant in the winter sky. All you do is you look at the southern heavens right about now, look for Orion, and look for the three belts of Orion and follow it right down, and there Sirius is. Outside the solar system, the brightest of the heavenly bodies. And the source of the calendar, ancient calendar of Kemet and the Dogon. The Dogon have 4 calendars also. One of them is based on Sirius. But what is more interesting from the point of view of Dogon is that they have a system around this body right there. These are artifacts. These are not, but this is actually a star. That star is called, by modern scientists, Sirius B. The Dogon call it Potolo, the seed star or the star of deep beginnings. Well, what about Potolo, called Sirius B? The Dogon have apparently known about it for 700 years. It was not discovered in the West until 1862. The reason why it was so difficult to see is because it is a white dwarf star. The Dogon call it a white. What is a white dwarf? A star, when our sun, or a star the size of the sun, comes to the end of its life and exhausts its fuel, it will first expand into a red giant, and the sun will gobble up the entire solar system as far as Mars. But then it will become so big that it will have to collapse down. And it will collapse down in a mighty explosion to a white dwarf. So the sun will become the size of maybe the moon. So all that mass is concentrated in a small body. The weight of a single teaspoon of a white dwarf like Sirius B is about 100 tons, because it is so small, dense, and heavy. The Dogon describe all of this. They describe Sirius B as being a white seed, is what they call it. It's very small, very dense, and very heavy. The Dogon say that it is composed of a metal not found on Earth they call Sagala, and it has been determined through spectrographic analysis that is exactly what it is composed of, a degenerate metal. They even describe, you see, when a red giant explodes to contract down a white dwarf, that is a nova explosion. It lights up the sky. The Dogon described that. The connections between white dwarfs and supernovas weren't even known until 1914. The Dogon even describe matter being made up of incredibly small spinning particles, i.e. atoms. They describe all of the constellations of being composed of countless of stars spinning in space as galaxies. They describe the 4 moons of Jupiter, and these people, to all intents and purposes, don't have even a system of writing that we know about. At least not one that anyone has ever discovered. They have, therefore, a knowledge of the cosmos and of the heavens and astronomy that rivals modern knowledge. This was found in Saqqara, dated to 300 BC, and at first was said to be a bird, until a NASA engineer said, next slide please, birds do not have reverse dihedral wings and vertical tails. So this is a glider, and an aerodynamically sound glider. Not an airplane, but it just shows you that in African science they had already started experimenting with aerodynamics 300 years before Jesus was born. So again, why are we afraid to be engineers?
The Queen Hathshepsut, who wanted to rule and not be disturbed by pregnancy, and that of scientists or doctors or physicians, chemists, developed a method to stop pregnancy, and still could enjoy her intercourse, and was made from a shrub of acacia and honey which break down into lactic acid. Try it in your chemistry class next time and see if I am telling a lie. Now, when you're dealing with that, that's 1550 BC. What that is before Adam and Eve is mentioned anywhere. There's no book dealing with any Adam and Eve yet.
The pyramid rises to a height of 481.5 feet. It is built of 2.7 million blocks of stone. The smallest stone is 2.5 tons, and the largest stone is somewhere between 70 and 100 tons. If you were to take the intact masonry of the Great Pyramid, by the way, can you hear me in the back? I don't want you to miss any of this. If you could take all of the intact masonry of the Great Pyramid and cut it up into 1-foot blocks, you could build a wall that would circle 2/3 of the globe. And you know they built it without even using the wheel? They used to float 1,000-ton blocks of granite from Aswan 500 miles down the river, and they can't even do that today. The pyramid was oriented precisely to the 4 cardinal points. The base of the pyramid, the side of each base of the pyramid was 755 feet, 6 inches, with an average error of 1/10,000th. The casing stones that covered the pyramid were so finely jointed that you could not and cannot insert a piece of your hair in between the joints, even today, where they are still in existence. The area of the base of the pyramid is 13 acres. But it's real interesting. If you look at the height of the pyramid, it is, if you measure it, it is the radius of a circle that you can create by turning the base of the square base of the pyramid into a circle. And therefore you can find the square base by the area of the perimeter of the square base by 2 pi r. So that means they had built the constant, the geometric constant of pi, into the pyramid. The descending passage was precisely aligned to the North Pole star that was in place 3,350 years BC, which and it used to shine down to the grotto into a pool of water, and of course it's only in that place once every 26,000 years. The so-called ventilating shaft of the King's Chamber oriented exactly to Orion in the southern heavens, and the one from the Queen's Chamber is oriented exactly to Sirius, also in the southern heaven. There has never been anything like it in the world. Nothing. Do you know the other thing about the Great Pyramid? Where the Great Pyramid sits, if you were to take all the longitude, there are 360 degrees of longitude around the Earth, right? The longitude of the Great Pyramid goes through more landmass than any other longitude in the world. The latitude of the Great Pyramid, going right through the Great Pyramid, goes through more latitudinal landmass than any other latitude in the world. So the Great Pyramid, from the point of view of land, is the center of the Earth. This is the reason why that not only in Egypt, but in Greece, Rome, Palestine, India, and China, build their cities in fixed intervals to the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid was the prime meridian. The prime meridian we got now going through Greenwich, England, is a complete artifact. It's not based on anything. The original prime meridian was the Great Pyramid. Next slide, please.
Great Pyramid, y'all.
Ayo. Ayo, ayo, ayo. Ayo, jalan.
Great Pyramid. Can't believe I'm here. This is all the folks. Beautiful thing.
In general, or Ethiopia, the one Greeks call it Lebus, the one call it Ortegia, Hesperia, Harmonious. These are names in which they call the continent, the oldest of which I found was archivable and used by the Ethiopians and by the Moors. Then in studying, I started to go back to God Ra. And then I came back and forth and find out, why are you such hypocrites? Tomorrow you're going into Sunday you're going into your church and you're going to call on the God, your ancient God, and don't know it. Next time I'll tell you, you're going to say the only one to free you is Jesus, but you call him Amon. You don't know that you're still calling an Amon Ra, because somebody likes you and said it means so be it. It doesn't mean so be it. Amon was the god of the north of Egypt, or the lower Egypt. Ra was the god of southern Egypt. When the hero of the south, Nama, otherwise called Mena, defeated the hero of the north to unify the land, Scorpion, and he won, he joined the two names, Amon Ra. And thus we got Amon Ra. And he claimed the creation of Rome and Greece. I can do more in proving to you that Rome and Greece was not Europe than anybody else can prove that Egypt was not Africa. Rome and Greece was not Europe. Two Mediterranean-inspired nations, because when they rose, there was no Europe. That's hard on your imagination. What created Europe? The challenge of Rome and Greece. Fighting Rome and Greece, they got themselves together to fight it or try to destroy it. Getting themselves together to fight this challenge made them a nation. They began to have facsimile nations, and they weren't even clear on the nation concept in Europe until near the end of the 18th and the 19th century. And you actually go, here's the people who came in the world civilized. And Europe was born when the ancient world was ending at the beginning of the modern world. There was no Europe in ancient times.
Documents we can read very easily, and there may well be independent confirmation of the historicity of some form of a Trojan War in those documents. And so what I'm really asking is, why is it that we're just really looking in one direction when we're talking about the origins of Greek civilization?
When Alexander entered Egypt, he wrote home to his mother and said that he at last reached the land where the Greek gods began, Apollo and Zeus. And he wanted to consult one of the great African teachers of oracles. And the oracle asked, how old is this man? He said, 32. They said, in 20 years, maybe he'll be wise enough to ask me a question that I care to answer. My research and other research. And that is why Egypt had to be claimed by the Europeans. That's why the Europeans had to make Egypt a European country, a white country, in spite of the fact. In spite of the fact. But you, in trying to become and make yourself equal, everything got to be equal. to nobody. I am it. You cannot come to me to learn mathematics, and I gave the world 1 to 9. When the world didn't have anything, I was counting. I had a written language I call Medu Nature, the writing of the gods. There was no Greece and no Etrusca and no Pyrrhus yet. That later became Rome and Greece. When I was going into chemistry, I left my writings in 100 of them that now they even call the Rockefeller papyrus, the Edwin C. Smith medical papyrus. This Edwin C. Smith is a surgical papyrus dealing with operation in the human spine, 1700 BC, 700 years before Rome or Greece.
I really believe that, because every evidence that was presented to me, all the books I read, all the things I saw in the world, made it absolutely clear to me that I belonged to an inferior race. There was not a single book on Africa in my library except Tarzan. There was not a single film I ever saw in Africa where the African wasn't some kind of semi-savage. There was not a single thing ever said about the African except that he was physically strong. How could I possibly therefore believe that he had civilization when I never saw any book showing that civilization? Now comes the question, what kind of thing did that do to me? It could have killed me. At the age of 32, I decided to take my life. I could easily have been snuffed out. The knowledge that came with the realization that shattered though our people were, scattered and dispersed across the diaspora, that we could recover enough that could give us a sense of wholeness so that our psyche could be healed, so that we no longer had to feel this self-hatred and self-contempt, so that we no longer wanted to do as one of our novelists from Guyana did. He, growing up like me, in spite of his achievements, so desperately wanted to rid himself of himself that he took gasoline and lit a match and burned his skin off. Naturally, he died. This is the kind of horror we lived with. We did not want to be black because black was associated with everything that was inferior. So do not for one moment think, as some people here think, that we in the Caribbean or out in Africa suffer any less anguish in terms of racism. We desperately needed to know so that we could feel again like real human beings. And the energy that was generated by those discoveries was so extraordinary that it's as if our circuits were charged all over again, as if we actually started to live again. It's as if we had come out of the grave after the crucifixion of racism, that we had come out of the grave and started to walk in the world again.